everybody. Our first concert in 2024 is called Explore.
And we've called it that because there are so many fantastic things to explore in this program. There's a piano virtuoso vehicle written by a composer who was exploring the limits of what could be done on the piano. And there's a beloved symphonic work written by a composer who was exploring the musical influences from a new land. But the program begins with something we should explore because we don't hear it often enough. This is a corker of an overture written by a Polish composer who is also a fantastic violinist.
That's right. Her name is Grażyna Baciewicz, and she studied both violin and composition in her native Poland before moving to Paris, where she studied with some of the most renowned teachers of the day, Nadia Boulanger for composition and Karl Flesch for violin. And when she returned to Poland, she won the International Wieniawski Violin Competition.
Now that's an amazing achievement, and at the same time, she was really gaining ground as a composer.
Yes, her rise as a composer went just as quickly, and she was aided by the fact that she could premiere some of her own works, such as her violin concertos and even some of her piano works.
But this was all kind of put on pause in a really big way by the Second World War.
That's right. When Hitler invaded Poland in 1939, all of her public performances ceased. However, she did continue to perform secretly in private, and she composed some of her major works during this time, most of which were performed as soon as the war was over.
And so we're opening the program with an overture from this kind of classification that was written in 1943 and premiered in 1945. And this overture is an amazing example of the incredible energy you can get from a musical perpetual motion machine. There are a lot of really fast notes that contribute to the energy. There's a brief middle section, beautiful and lyrical with a flute solo and winds, but pretty soon that engine comes back and the piece ends in an amazing energetic climax. So let's fast forward now to the big program closer, the beloved Ninth Symphony of Dvorak, entitled The Symphony from the New World. And he called it that because he spent many years in New York.
Yes, in 1892, Jeanette Thurber invited Dvorak to come and be the director of the National Conservatory there, and he spent 3 years there.
And in the same way that before making that voyage, he had incorporated the influence of a lot of folk melodies from his Czech heritage into his symphonic music. When he arrived in America, he was interested in exploring the musical influences of his new surroundings.
Yes, and he stated before the premiere of the symphony that the future of American music lay in being based on Black spirituals and Native American songs and dances, as he himself demonstrated in his New World Symphony. Specifically, he was fascinated by the Black spirituals that he heard sung to him by Henry T. Burley, a student at the conservatory there.
So let's hear how some of these spiritual melodies influenced Dvorak's tunes in his New World Symphony. We all know Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. Now imagine what would happen if we didn't hear the first 3 notes of Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, but we started right away with the note that has chariot on it. That's basically what Dvorak did, just changing things ever so slightly in this lyrical theme from the first movement of his New World Symphony.
And how about that famous English horn theme in the slow movement?
Well, this is what everybody really thinks of, this beautiful music, when they think of the New World Symphony. And of course, we all know that as the spiritual going home.
Actually, it's the reverse. Dvorak wrote it first, and then it became the spiritual.
Well, you're the expert, and if you hadn't been telling me that for the past 5 decades, I never would have known that the influences went both ways.
So now let's move on to the American Indian influences in the scherzo. Dvorak had become familiar with Longfellow's Song of Hiawatha in the Czech translation, and Jeanette Thurber actually wanted him to write an opera on the subject, which he never did.
And it can't be a surprise that even though Dvorak didn't write anything about Hiawatha, one of his key students, Samuel Coleridge Taylor, did his famous choral work, The Song of Hiawatha.
So Dvorak had already written a bunch of themes on Hiawatha, and in the scherzo, he said before the premiere, and I'll read this, it was suggested by the wedding feast in Hiawatha where Indians dance. And it is also an essay that I made in the direction of imparting the local color of Indian character to the music.
So let's hear those wonderfully infectious, insistent rhythms that happen at the beginning of the third movement, the scherzo of Dvorak's New World Symphony. Now, in addition to being influenced by Black spiritual music and American Indian drumming music, I can't help but think that when Dvorak spent 3 years in New York, he had to get a good dose of Irish country fiddling. Now, you may recall a couple of years ago when we were talking about Dvorak's influence on Florence Price's Symphony No. 1, we even gave an example from Dvorak's last movement of Irish country fiddle music here. We were talking about the Dvorak influence, so I just can't help remembering this little bit, which some of you may recognize from the last movement of Dvorak's New World Symphony. Did you hear the fiddling?
Yeah. So how about the middle of this program, the Liszt Piano Concerto?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. So this is the final way that we can all explore, everybody. We can go to the Stockton Symphony YouTube channel and find there a recent interview with our virtuoso pianist, Roberto Plano, of Italian heritage. And he's a wonderful soloist who plays this piece incredibly well. It'll be so great to see you all back in our concert hall for our first program in 2024.
See you soon.